Never underestimate a mother protecting her daughter's dignity. That was the first thing I said to Geraldine Mercer as she sat on my tufted velvet armchair like she owned it. Legs crossed, arms folded, the queen of a house she didn't pay a single cent for. My voice was calm, but even the air seemed to tighten when I walked in. She blinked at me like she couldn't decide whether to smirk or cower. "I think it's time we made something very clear," I told her, setting my purse down with a deliberate thud. "This is not your son's home, and it's certainly not yours. You walked into my daughter's life like it was a free buffet, and I've let you take a few too many bites. That ends today." What brought us to that moment? Let me rewind a little. It started, ironically, with a wedding gift. I remember standing in the sun-drenched foyer of our home in Maine, holding a small velvet box in my hand, and wondering how something so beautiful could carry so much hope. And, as I'd later learn, so much regret. My daughter Isabelle had just called. She was breathless, excited, utterly in love. "Mom, his name is Colin. He's different. He listens. He's not flashy or over the top, but he makes me feel like I matter." Of course I was happy for her. Isabelle had always been too soft-hearted for her own good, the kind of girl who left thank-you notes for her baristas and cried over animals in detergent commercials. At 28, she was smart, accomplished, and still somehow believed love could fix anything. Colin, as she described him, was quiet, polite, gentle in that almost too careful way. They met at a work mixer. He'd been the shy IT guy lurking near the cheese platter. Isabelle had cracked a joke about corporate name tags, and just like that, he'd lit up. They bonded over indie films and a mutual dislike for networking events. There. First dates were sweet. Coffee shops, bookstores, long walks near the harbor. Once, when Isabelle caught the flu, he brought over homemade soup and sat with her for hours, watching old musicals and brushing the hair from her forehead. He was, she said, not like other guys. And maybe that was true. But even then there were signs. Valentine's Day came and went, and Isabelle, ever gracious, showed up at our house, beaming, with a single white rose in her hand. "Colin doesn't believe in materialism," she said, clearly repeating something he told her. "We just grabbed burgers and talked. It was actually really meaningful." I tried not to react, but I remember my husband Richard muttering under his breath, "Meaningful doesn't mean cheap." Still, Isabelle defended him. "He's saving up. He wants a future with me. That's what matters." I wanted to believe her, but in my gut, I knew. I just didn't want to be the mother who ruined her daughter's joy too early. I told myself, maybe I'm being too critical. Maybe love really does look different now. It wasn't until she visited Colin's family that the picture sharpened into something darker. They lived on a sagging plot of land 2 hours from anywhere, in a house that hadn't seen paint in 20 years. Isabelle went for the weekend and came back pale. "Quiet," I asked her gently. "How was it?" She smiled too quickly. "It was interesting. His mom's very direct." "What did she say?" Isabelle hesitated. Then, mimicking the woman's voice, she said, "City girls usually make lousy wives. Can you even cook without Uber Eats?" I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. And that was when I felt it. That first twinge of something heavy settling in my chest. A mother's intuition, I suppose. A whisper that said, "Watch closely. Protect her." But I didn't know that whisper would soon become a scream. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're Subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Colin proposed on a rainy Thursday evening. No grand gesture, no candles or rose petals. Just him, in a wrinkled button-down shirt, holding out a tiny box in their shared apartment's kitchen. Isabelle said yes with tears in her eyes. Later, over coffee at our house, she confessed the truth. "He didn't buy the ring," she whispered, cheeks flushed. "He couldn't afford it. I used my bonus from work. But I told him it was a gift from my aunt, just so he wouldn't feel bad." She said it like a secret worth protecting, like it was noble, like love meant covering for someone else's pride. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at her and said, "Sweetheart, never build a life on a lie. It never holds the weight." Isabelle just smiled in that way daughters do when they think they know better than their mothers. A week later, Richard and I sat at our kitchen table long after midnight, sipping lukewarm tea and staring at a blueprint spread across the counter. "It's a wedding gift," he said, tapping the corner of the plan with a pen. "We can't pick her husband, but we can give her a home she'll feel safe in. We bought a 2-story house just outside of Boston. Not flashy, just elegant. Big bay windows. A garden with lilacs and lavender." Isabelle had always loved those. We renovated it from top to bottom. Heated floors, quartz countertops, a clawfoot, tub for long baths after hard days. Every inch chosen with care, with love. "This," Richard said, standing in the living room once the last piece of furniture had arrived, "is where she'll build her life, where she'll feel strong." We planned to surprise her with the keys after brunch on Sunday, but the house wasn't empty when we got there. It started with a cigarette. The stench hit me before we even stepped inside. Richard paused at the door, nostrils flaring. We looked at each other. And then we heard it. Loud voices, laughter, a chair scraping against the hardwood. I pushed open the door. There, in the middle of our newly furnished living room, sat Harold Mercer in a recliner that wasn't his, flicking ashes into a crystal dish we'd bought from. Paris. Colin's brother Travis lounged on the couch, shoes on the upholstery, holding a beer. And Geraldine, well, she stood at the kitchen island, inspecting the marble like she was about to critique a hotel. "Oh," she said when she saw us. "Took you long enough. We thought you got lost." My heart sank. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice low. Geraldine didn't blink. "We figured it was time to get settled. Travis is moving in with us for a while. He'll take the guest room. Harold and I will have the master. Colin and Isabelle can figure out the rest." Isabelle stood near the staircase, her eyes wide and stunned. She looked at me like a child who just discovered monsters were real. "This house is hers," I said. Geraldine's eyes narrowed. "Please, Colin's the man, the head of their new household. The house belongs to them, not just her." Richard stepped forward, fists clenched. "You don't get to waltz in and claim what isn't yours." But Geraldine just smiled sweetly. "We're family now, and family shares." It was then that I realized we weren't dealing with a misunderstanding. This was a takeover. And they thought we would roll over. They didn't know me at all. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed listening to the wind rattle the windows, my mind circling around one question. Why didn't Colin stop them? The next morning, I got my answer. Isabelle showed up at our house with a paper bag of croissants and eyes that looked like they hadn't rested in days. She sat down at the kitchen table, hands trembling around her coffee cup. "I asked him to say something," she said softly. "I told him it made me uncomfortable. His parents, his brother, just moving in." I waited. "He said it's normal," she continued, "that his family always lived together, supported one another. He said I was being ungrateful for objecting to her home being turned into a communal bunkhouse. He told me to apologize to his mother. I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not even surprise. Just a deep, ice-cold clarity. The kind that lets you see every step you'll need to take before you take the first one. Did you? I asked. Isabelle shook her head. No, but I stayed quiet. The following weekend, Richard and I returned to the house. Not as guests, but as owners. We found Geraldine rearranging the pantry and muttering about how city folks don't know how to stock properly. Harold had his muddy boots on the beige rug in the foyer. Travis was yelling at someone on speakerphone, his voice echoing off the freshly painted walls. And Colin was nowhere to be found. Isabelle stood in the kitchen chopping vegetables. She looked small, shrinking into herself. She didn't even turn around when we walked in. Geraldine pointed at her like she was a waitress. Make sure you peel the carrots properly, this time. Yesterday they were gritty. I stepped forward, calm and direct. She's not your servant. Geraldine scoffed. Excuse me? You heard me. Before she could reply, Harold stomped into the room. Is there a problem here? Yes, I said. There is. This is my daughter's home. And you're treating her like hired help. He crossed his arms. This house is for Colin and his future, not for some spoiled girl who can't even boil water without crying. That's when Isabelle finally spoke. Her voice cracked, but it was steady. This is my home. You don't get to decide who belongs here. Geraldine looked her up and down. You? What did you bring into this marriage? You didn't even pay. For the ring on your finger. Silence. Thick and suffocating. Then a new voice cut through it. Colin! Stepping through the back door. Mom, stop! But there was no conviction behind it. Just fatigue. Cowardice wrapped in false neutrality. Geraldine turned to him, triumphant. Tell her she's overreacting. Colin looked at Isabelle, then at his shoes. She could try to be more understanding. That was the final blow. Isabelle set the knife down, wiped her hands, turned to face him fully. If you think I'm going to spend the rest of my life cooking and cleaning for a family that treats me like furniture, think again. Colin's face darkened. Don't make this a scene. Oh, I'm not making a scene, she said, voice rising. I'm making a decision. She pulled the engagement ring off her finger and placed it on the counter. I'm done, Harold scoffed. You'll regret this. No man's gonna want a mouthy woman your age. Before I could speak, Richard did. One punch. Square to Harold's jaw. The old man stumbled back, crashing into a chair. Then Richard turned and slapped Colin across the face. Not out of anger, but disappointment. You let them humiliate her in a house she gave you. Colin staggered back. Geraldine screamed. Travis shouted something unintelligible. But Isabelle... She stood perfectly still. Then she smiled. It was the first real smile I'd seen on her face in months. And in that moment I knew. My daughter had just reclaimed herself. It would have been enough. You know, the breakup, the confrontation, the walkout. Most people, after being told we're done, would have quietly licked their wounds and disappeared. But not Colin. He wasn't done. Not with Isabelle. And certainly not with us. A week later, she received an email. The subject line was blank. No greeting. Just a PDF attachment titled Reimbursement Statement.pf. I opened it while she sat next to me, biting her thumbnail and blinking fast. The document was 3 pages long. Each line item was dated organized and labeled like he'd been preparing it for months. March 2nd, 2 cappuccinos from Daily Grind, $7.85, April 18th, Uber to concert, split fare, $13.30. May 9th, movie tickets, 26.0. June 14th, takeout dinner, Isabelle insisted, $34.12. Subtotal, $2,193.12 at the bottom, he'd added. Since this relationship was terminated prematurely, I believe it's fair that costs incurred during our time together be equally accounted for. Isabelle was silent for a long time. Then, with a voice flat as glass, she said, "He's invoicing me for love." The next blow came 2 days later. Geraldine and Harold showed up at Isabelle's workplace, an upscale marketing firm in downtown Boston, storming through the lobby like they were filming an episode of daytime television. "She used our son," Geraldine shrieked, "drained him dry and left him." Harold waved a manila envelope in the air. "We've got receipts. She owes him thousands." Security intervened, but not before several co-workers had pulled out their phones. Isabelle called me from the bathroom, her voice shaking. "I don't know how to walk back out there." I was already in the car. By the time I arrived, they were still in the lobby, arguing with the building manager. I walked straight past them, right up to Isabelle's floor. Her team sat frozen, pretending not to look as she stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself. I gave her the envelope I had brought. Inside was a check for $3,000. She looked at me. "Are we really paying them?" I nodded once. "Not for them. For you." Together we rode the elevator back down. The moment Geraldine spotted us, she launched into another tirade. But I didn't let her finish. I walked up to her, smiled coldly, and let the check fall to the floor between us. "There," I said. "Every cent, and a little extra for the emotional labor." She sputtered. I turned to Harold. "I suggest you frame it, because that's the closest you'll ever get to earning a single dollar from my daughter again." Gasps and whispers rippled through the lobby. A few people clapped as Geraldine bent down to snatch the check. Her purse spilled open, receipts, coupons, and a half-eaten granola bar scattered everywhere. It was petty, it was small, and it was delicious. Because sometimes the most satisfying revenge doesn't need to scream. It just needs to land with the softest, most final kind of silence. For a brief moment, we thought it was over. We had returned the money. We had shut them down in public. Isabelle had started laughing again, even if only in short bursts. She came by for dinner. She wore color again. But Colin wasn't done. When Isabelle began receiving anonymous messages online, nasty comments about entitled women who steal from good men, we suspected but didn't know for sure. Then someone tagged her in a forum post. The username was a string of random letters, but the words were unmistakably his. She used me, lied about loving me, took my money, my time, my heart. Now she's moved on like I never mattered. Gold diggers don't always wear red lipstick. They often come in soft voices and tears. It was venom, polished, dramatic, and cruel. And it was spreading. Then came the letter, delivered by hand. No return address, just Isabelle's name in careful cursive. She opened it in our kitchen while I washed dishes. I turned at the sound of her sharp inhale. Inside was 2 pages, handwritten. "You broke me," it read. "You ruined something pure. I can't sleep. I see your face when I close my eyes. I don't know what I'll do if I see you with someone else. Please, come back, before I do something I can't take back." She dropped, hit on the counter like it had burned her. That night, we called our lawyer. By the following morning, we had filed for a restraining order. In court, Isabelle's voice trembled as she read the letter aloud. But she never faltered. Colin sat at the defendant's table, jaw clenched, eyes darting. He didn't say a word. The judge granted the order. Full no contact, digital and physical, effective immediately. Outside the courtroom, Isabelle collapsed into my arms, shaking. "I feel like I'm finally waking up from something," she whispered. "You're not weak," I told her. "You're healing. And that takes more strength than anyone gives you credit for." And she did heal. She buried herself in work. Not to forget, but to rebuild. She poured her energy into a pitch for the company's biggest client, something bold and risky that no one else had dared attempt. And it worked. 3 weeks later, her boss called her into the office, eyes wide and smiling. Isabelle had been chosen to represent the firm at an international conference in New York. Her name would be on the press materials. Her work would be seen. She called me that night, breathless. "I'm scared." "Good," I said. "It means you're about to do something that matters." At the conference, she wore a dark green pantsuit and a quiet confidence that stunned the room. She stood at the podium, told stories about brand authenticity and connection, and people listened. Not because she demanded it, but because she didn't need to. She didn't need to be loud anymore. She had become undeniable. And when I watched the video afterward, her voice clear, her eyes focused, I realized something. That house may have been the battlefield, but this was the victory. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon when Isabelle met Graham Wells. She was at a networking brunch in New York, still running on adrenaline from the conference. He wasn't flashy, no designer suit or loud charm, just a simple navy sweater, thoughtful eyes, and the kind of presence that made people lower their voices when he leaned in. They started talking over fruit and black coffee. He asked her what she did. Not in that performative way men do, when trying to guess a woman's salary, but like he genuinely wanted to know. She told him about branding, about storytelling, about making people feel seen. He nodded slowly, then said, "You're the kind of person who notices the details most people miss." She blinked. No one had ever said that before. Their conversation drifted from work to books to childhood memories. There was no rushing, no angle, just two people unfolding in each other's presence. Afterward, she found a small envelope tucked into her notebook. Inside was a handwritten note. "You speak like someone who's learned to protect her light. If you'd ever like to share more of it, I'd be honored." Graham, no phone number, just his name and a quiet invitation. Isabelle didn't call right away. She let it sit for a few days, turning it over like a smooth stone in her palm. She'd spent so long recovering, so long learning to trust her own voice again. She wasn't sure she had space for anyone else's. But something about him didn't press, and that was why she did. Their first dinner was simple. Grilled fish, soft jazz. A conversation that ran until the restaurant flicked the lights to signal closing time. Graham didn't try to rescue her. He didn't ask for her past. He just made room for her present. "You don't need to be impressive," he said during one of their walks. "You already are. I just enjoy watching you be." When she finally told him everything about Colin, the house, the family, who tried to erase her, he listened, not with pity, with respect. One evening, months later, he took her to meet his family. His mother, a retired English teacher, made pear tartlets from scratch. His father told stories about fishing trips and accidentally catching boots instead of trout. They laughed. They asked questions. They listened. After dinner, his mom hugged Isabelle and whispered, "Thank you for being so kind to my son." And Isabelle blinked, because in that moment she realized this was what she'd been starved for. Not romance, not rescue. Respect, warmth, a place to land. Later that night, as Graham walked her to the car, he took her hand gently. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," he said. "But if you ever feel safe enough to let someone stand beside you, I'm here." She smiled. Not because she needed him, but because she wanted to. And that made all the difference, Colin found out through a photo. It wasn't dramatic. Just a simple picture Isabelle had posted from a quiet weekend in Vermont. She was wrapped in a thick scarf, standing beside Graham, both of them holding mugs and laughing at something just outside the frame. But Colin saw it, and apparently that was enough. He waited outside Isabelle's office the following week, leaning against a street lamp like he belonged in some twisted romantic movie. When she stepped out with her coat half-zipped and earbuds in, he pushed off the pole and walked straight into her path. She froze. He looked thinner, grayer. The kind of tired that doesn't come from sleepless nights but from carrying too much self-pity for too long. "So that's it?" he asked. "You toss me out and slide into someone else's life like none of it mattered?" Isabelle didn't answer right away. She looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, didn't feel fear. Just distance, like watching a closed door in a house she no longer lived in. "Go home, Colin," she said calmly. "This isn't your place anymore." He took a step closer. "You think he knows you? You think he gets who you really are?" Another step. That's when Graham appeared. He had been walking from the cafe across the street, a takeout cup in each hand. He didn't raise his voice or puff out his chest. He just stepped in between them and said, without blinking, "I don't know who you are, but if you take one more step toward her, I'll call the police." Colin hesitated. For the briefest second, he looked like a man deciding whether to implode or walk away. He chose the latter, but not before muttering, "You'll regret this." Graham waited until Colin turned the corner, then handed Isabelle her coffee. "You okay?" She exhaled slowly. "I think I am." They walked in silence for a few blocks. Finally, she said, "I didn't even flinch. That's because you're not afraid anymore." Graham replied, "Fear doesn't live here now." And she believed him, not because he said it, but because, for the first time in years, it was true. The leaves had just begun to turn when Isabelle and I walked the old trail behind our family cabin, a quiet path we hadn't set foot on since she was a teenager. The lake shimmered ahead, calm and glassy, untouched by the wind. We stood at the edge of the dock, the same one where she used to sit with scraped knees and storybooks, and just listen to the quiet. She slipped her arm through mine. "Mom," she said, "do you think people spend their whole lives chasing happiness?" I thought about it for a moment. "No," I said. "I think they chase peace. Happiness is loud, fleeting. But peace settles in your bones." She nodded slowly, like she already knew the answer, but needed to hear it out loud. "I used to think being loved by someone made life meaningful," she whispered. "That if I could just be the right kind of woman, love would fix everything." "And now?" I asked. She smiled, eyes focused on the horizon. "Now I think learning to love yourself is the only thing that truly makes you whole." The sun dipped lower, turning the water amber. "Do you think I missed my chance?" she asked softly. I turned to her, Sweetheart, you didn't miss anything. You arrived, and that's the bravest thing I've ever seen you do." We stood there a while longer, the silence between us rich, not empty. As we headed back up the trail, Isabelle paused. She looked over her shoulder, back toward the lake, her voice quiet but certain. "Sometimes revenge isn't shouting. It's not chaos or fire." She took a breath. "It's walking away from people who never deserved to witness your healing. It's building a life they can't touch. Not because you hate them, but because you've outgrown them." I watched her then, shoulders strong, stride steady, and I realized something. She wasn't broken, she was finally free. And this time, she wasn't walking away to escape. She was walking forward, toward something better, toward herself. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't loud. It isn't slamming doors or shouting matches or viral takedowns. Sometimes it's walking away with your head high and knowing they'll never again have the privilege to break you. If this story moved something in you, I'd love to know. Have you ever had to stand up for someone you love? Or for yourself? Leave a comment below. Type 2. If you believe Eleanor did the right thing. Type 7. If you wish Isabelle had fought back even harder. And if you felt this story in your bones, hit like and subscribe to Sophia's Revenge Stories. Because next week, we're going somewhere even deeper. And I promise, you don't want to miss it.